cephalopods are also really creepy. They have too many legs, and they're like
That's very true.
look evil. Like their faces look like they're up to no good.
Yeah.
And they're just bugs. And they're not evil. Like they're just existing. But at the same time, you're like, I don't like you.
Hi, I'm Kat.
And I'm Gabe.
And we're
the Ghouls next door. Talk about spooky stuff.
Spooky stuff.
Like the environment being mad at us.
The eroding decay of our planet slowly at our own hands.
Arguably, it's the environment just acting the way they do in making best with what we've given it, and it's at our expense.
Yeah, I mean, we are the predator in this scenario, so they're like, hey, stop it. We're going to evolve to eventually stop you naturally through occurring things. Yes. Ultimately, we are the parasite.
We are always the parasite. I feel like that's the conclusion we come to most often here at the Ghouls. And for those listening, we are the media literacy podcast from a horror lens, where we explore the real life, psychological, historical, environmental reasonings behind our cinematic fears. And this series is about ecological horror, eco horror, and we're talking about one of my favorite found footage films, because I think it does a wonderful job at being found footage, and is sufficiently scary in ways that like people argue that found footage is not.
Yeah, no, this film is very scary. It succeeded very much in its scary times.
So we're talking about The Bay, which is a found footage horror film, and one of my favorites. I'd say top 5 when it comes to found footage. And it's very different from what you think of when you think of found footage. It is what I think like Devil's Pass was like trying to be, where it was like, we're going to do it something scientific or actual, whatever. And then they did a bad job at it. You know how I feel about Devil's Pass. Yeah,
it was a very bad movie. The like, plot and just way of existing. It did just a bad job across the board, unfortunately. But this movie did a really good job in making me hate stuff. But also, like, I don't ever want to see it again, just because I just don't wish to subject myself to such things. But it was a good movie.
Yeah.
It's not, I did not think it's just, I recognize that it addresses a specific fear that I have that I don't wish to experience often. And is less about it, like the quality of the movie. The movie was very good. It's just scary for me in a very visceral way.
All right, let's do this. So we are talking about The Bay, which is pure terror. So let me tell you what it is about. Here is the description from IMDb, and it's a film from 2012, and it says, chaos breaks out in a small Maryland town after an ecological disaster occurs, and it's directed by Barry Levinson. And it's, I would say, one of the best found footage horror films, in my humble opinion, as someone who's a very big fan of the subgenre. But mostly because it feels very real in ways that found footage often doesn't. And it's also 80% real facts. So there's a reason why it's so accurately terrifying. The film is a collection of various found footage from news, personal video recorders, FaceTime videos, all kinds of things. And it primarily focuses on the retelling of the fateful 4th of July by this former reporter, Donna, who's played by Heather Donahue from You're the Worst. And as soon as I was like, her face is very familiar. And as soon as she opened her mouth, I was like, oh my God, it's Lindsay.
It's the voice.
I got so excited.
You could tell right away.
And I love her. So it was really nice to see her in her younger years. And this is clearly before she became any, like, even kind of recognizable, because that's the whole point of found footage, is you don't
Yeah, it was also
want named
2012,
actors.
forever ago.
Yeah. And so this is the overarching like kind of documentary feel is that it's happening years later. She is breaking her silence, and thanks to the helpful WikiLeaks adjacent site, GovLeaks or something, footage that had been covered up by different governing parties are now available to the public, which that's what WikiLeaks does. And if you'll remember from the horrible Devil's Pass, they also try to use a WikiLeaks-esque site to explain their footage. But unlike most found footage films, The Bay features a natural and believable eclectic mix of footage and stories. Like sometimes it's like, okay, what are the odds that we would have footage in this location or this time, or that the audio is enhanced in certain ways? But that just kind of comes with the territory of found footage, is that you're going to get...
it's still a movie.
Circumstances.
End of the day.
But what I really loved about it is that we don't follow just one Marylander. We are essentially spending time with all of Claridge as a whole and getting to see them on this personal level that makes it even more horrifying when you see how unhuman or inhuman the parties in control are, because they're not seeing these people as people.
Just neglect.
Pure neglect all the time. We get to see the government agencies. We see the hospital workers, young girls, oceanographers, teens in love, neighbors, news teams, everybody. Miss Crustacean, which is what I'm dressed as for people who are watching. I got a little crab on my sash. Literally this whole town, which is very small, you get to see them, and it felt very real in that way. And it pieces together the sequence of events kind of in order of the day unfolding. So you kind of get to see how it dawns on them slowly, and like how out of control it gets like quickly, and that they just don't have any control as people on the events, and that no one was looking out for their best interest. But it also blends in this like past footage of these oceanographers who had warned the governing parties of the dangers long before the terror happened on that day. And it's interesting because you'll have the like what's happening in the day, and there's like a crab eating contest, and then it's like ominous, like here's the oceanographers on a boat being like, this water is bad. And then you have like flash cut to the governor being like, or the mayor being like, I love this water, it's so clean. Which I thought was, they showed that scene so many times, like look how crystal clear it is. Like that's not how you, okay. But in the film, like we really just start with this cute and quaint small waterside town with Miss Crustacean pageants and crab eating contests and the promise of fireworks and just like family fun time. And not soon after the Independence Day festivities begin, we hear the mayor and the former, what was he, vacuum salesman? Balk at rumors that the water is unsafe. Like he it's one thing if you just like were ignorant and you didn't know that like that, which is bad because that's like your job. But he's literally like trying to disprove any concerns and like telling people not to be worried and drinking the water and doing this whole thing. And he's like reveling in the booming poultry industry and touts about the power of the water purifier and like all this like business that he has brought to this small town. And he's like, people who are worried about the water, they're dumb. It's fine. I have the purifier and we're rich now. You're welcome.
Human lives don't matter if there's money to be made. I think that's like how the CDC responds. Mm-hmm. Or not the CDC. They call the guy who's like a governor or something. And he's like, we can't shut down. It's there's tourism and stuff. Yeah, you're going to shut down on 4th of July weekend? Like, that's so much money for the... And it's like, okay, but people's, like, faces are exploding.
Yeah.
So, like, what do you mean?
Like, our very tiny town is in trouble. And I think what's interesting is that the story really only takes place over one day. It's a span of a day.
Quick
and
die.
The end of which results in the death of 700 of these Claridge citizens out of the 1,600 total that they had in the beginning. That is a big chunk of people.
Big percent, yeah.
And, you know, in the end, they're like, but it's one small town. It's literally what they say, which is super gross. So I'm going to get into some spoilers on the Bay. Definitely check it out. It's not for the weak of stomachs. It is pretty gruesome, even though it's like, there are just scenes that they really get those bugs doing stuff you can't do. Yeah, definitely don't eat before or during like Kat did. And close your eyes if you need to close your eyes. And so you may wonder, how could something so awful happen overnight? And of course, it didn't. It's not one night that it just happens that, you know, this is when we're seeing it. But the film informs us pretty quickly about the death of two of those oceanographers that I mentioned that we kind of see a little bit of. And their deaths are deemed shark attacks, despite them having suffered peculiar injuries that are kind of as if they had been eaten from the inside out.
Yeah, you know, I heard once that one time the bull sharks, they did that, you know. I've heard of bull shark attacks, you know, Gabe. I heard of that. Out? Yeah, you know, one time my friend's cousin's neighbor was bit by a bull shark. So
and this has nothing to do with putting my poultry industry in jeopardy.
No.
So they die, and the film is like, it's sus. But the authorities were like, it was a shark attack, and it's kind of weird that there's sharks here, but it happens, you know? But we learned that the oceanographers had been inspecting the water and the levels of toxicity, and they were growing concerned about that toxicity and it becoming this toxic soup in the bay that was having an effect on marine life. And throughout the film, we watched them uncover increasingly more horrifying things in the ocean, like as they're getting to literally the bottom of what's going on. Bad
soup, not good soup.
And they literally do get to the bottom of the ocean, and that's how they died. But their footage is every single time they like show it to us, the footage is followed by a title card explaining that they had like reached out to the appropriate office each time, like the mayor, and that there was no evidence that that office ever responded to the email. They're like, we have reports that it's very alarming that the fish are falling apart, and that
because that information was free.
Yeah, and they're like, no,
gave them no money.
Yeah, and so they actually discover that the isopods have evolved because of a high volume of excrement from the poultry farms, which had become incredibly toxic just due to the variety of steroids and other chemicals that they were putting into the chickens to make them grow faster. So chickens are live beings that are growing faster, and now we're putting those same chemicals into the waters, and then that's making other living creatures grow faster, and it expedites the evolutionary process. And so then this evolved monstrous isopod then kills millions of fish and causes 40% of the bay to become lifeless, which is interesting because sadly, no, we just did that. It wasn't even an isopod that caused 40% of the bay to become lifeless.
It's just people doing gross.
Yeah. And something I found super interesting and what added to the horror of the film is that the director, Barry Levinson, was originally going to make a documentary about pollution and the crisis in Maryland's Chesapeake Bay, but then he found out that there were other productions happening, like this other team was creating a documentary under the same topic, so he was like, well, let's do a different genre, and it's still educational, it's still good, like, this is the best example of, like, how you could just scare people into conservation. And you know the Ghouls love when a creator seeks to scare you into caring about issues. It's like our favorite thing. So this is like a number one film. So the found footage part is what I think makes it really interesting, because it very easily could have just been like a narrative film where we just follow some characters or whatever. But the found footage really adds to it.
Yeah.
So I found some interesting facts about the film and how it was made on an Wired article titled "The Bay Spikes Cell Phone Footage with Environmental Horror" by Angela Watercutter. I'm going to be using a lot of quotes from them. And so Levinson used more than 20 kinds of digital cameras and cell phones, and because a lot of the film involves victims and first responders chronicling their experiences with the isopods, Levinson estimates about 1/3 of the flick was shot by the Bay's largely unknown actors, because it's more believable that way. Like, I think in Paranormal Activity, no one knew who those two people were, and they use their first names. Like, the actors' first names are what their names are as the characters, because it's just easier to say your name. And if people look you up, they see your name. I think this was like one of my favorite parts of the film, was just like all the different uses that were very real. So, as a lover of found footage, and I've said it a million times, if a film can effectively convince me that this is found footage and not footage pretending to be found, I will wholeheartedly suspend disbelief and enjoy the film.
Yeah.
Just like, I will be like, yeah, this is real. And, you know, like the fourth kind. Love it. And the Bay features a... The Bay features a wide range of media access, such as security cam footage, news footage, personal FaceTimes. There's dashboard cams from police officers, and so much more. It's just there's a recording of a podcaster in the radio station. And while in reality it's really uncomfortable to imagine all of your content, personal or otherwise, being accessed by an online file share service, regardless of benevolence, it's not too far from how the real world works. The cloud is not inaccessible. Just, it's there. And if you want to learn more about our government surveillance on its citizens, you could check out the Ghouls episode specifically on surveillance. So while it's a great addition to making the film scary, I was also like,
yeah, I'm sure it's gotten worse too. I'm sure they look even more now. They have so much more access, right? From everyone just being inside.
That's why I think, like, something like this getting covered up, it makes so much sense that, like, there would just be footage from people's phones and other things that would make it hard to cover up. You know? And someone would reveal it on something like WikiLeaks. But obviously, because of other WikiLeaks that have happened, people forget about it anyway. So what does it matter? Not to be a curmudgeon here, but in an interview on HuffPost titled "Barry Levinson's The Bay is a fictional horror movie meant to save the real Chesapeake," director Levinson explained their excitement over the potential of our surveyed world and how it'll change the way we understand, react, and feel about natural disasters and crises. They say, if something catastrophic happens today, for the first time in history, we have far more personal documentation than just a news camera that might have been there at the right time. The tsunami in Japan was the first time that happened, then the protests in Egypt. Future history will be told by piecing together emails, text messages, Facebook posts, Skype conversations, still photographs, and smartphone videos, which will truly create the story of how we lived our lives and communicated with each other. Or at least, will attribute to it. I don't know if it'll be exact, but it is true that, like, even just thinking of, like, the George Floyd protest, right? It's thanks to the fact that someone was recording that with their phone that we have that. So if we had a crisis like this, there's no doubt that there would be they only had like one FaceTime video in there. I was like, there'd be a whole live blog. There'd be live video on Facebook and Twitter happening of like, my face is falling off.
Because since 2012, technology has evolved to the point where like we kind of live all of our existence on social media. So yeah, I totally believe someone would be on TikTok live just being like, I don't know what's happening. And then someone would be like, get her help.
It'd be like someone doing like a TikTok dance while someone's dying. Because I don't
right? Oh my God. Influencers.
Try to cover it up, right? You can't, because it's the glory of like surveillance. When it's like us doing it. Anyway, with found footage films like Paranormal Activity, Blair Witch Project, Cloverfield, Host, and more, there's this kind of supernatural or otherworld make-believe experience that is definitely frightening and very fun to experience, especially in the found footage format. But there's a level to it that's so obviously fictional that as viewers, we can't like completely suspend disbelief. You're not just like, oh, this Cloverfield monster is real. Like, no one's really thinking that. And everyone's doubting, the Blair Witch the whole time. That kind of thing. But with the Bay, because the story feels very human, it's easy to fall for the narrative. And in our natural disaster series, we found a trend that was really upsetting, and where the governing parties, to avoid panic, or shall they say, withhold information. And we saw that firsthand with our own government and many others around the world during this pandemic. And it's aggravating and upsetting to watch on screen when the scientists are like begging for attention to very real issues while those in charge just shrug it off. And when this film came out, many of us knew that was how the government and other parties in charge would act in such a situation. But in today's pandemic world, we know firsthand how it's manipulated and the information is distorted when it's funneled through the controlled media outlets specifically. So that's why something like a leaked site makes sense for it. So when we see in this film the mayor and the CDC or the Coast Guard and all the other organizations ignoring, diminishing, or outright denying real horrifying issues, it feels very real. And Levinson, in that HuffPost article, in the interview, said, "Another truth is that most things in this country are controlled by big money interests. They play high stakes and have deep pockets so they can move and change public opinion quickly. It's not like we're playing on an even playing field. Large corporations in this country easily set the agenda. And if they don't want people to panic and no longer like..."
Or if they do want them to panic, but about the other, like the wrong stuff.
Yeah, because they're like, we don't want people to not feel comfortable with the chicken runoff. So
still want to eat chicken though, so that's fine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. The other part of that isn't just the neglect of people in power and how they're ultimately the villains of the film, but there's this other layer of the monster in the film, and that's the isopods. And what I think is so important about eco-horror films is that they're not malicious. It's similar with like the natural disaster films or even the apocalypse. In some ways, the Earth and the creatures in it that we share this planet with are simply trying to exist and continue to live. They don't care about us. They don't think about us. They're not vengeful in trying to destroy us. They're not strategically doing that. So when the isopods evolve and begin eating us in this film, it's definitely disgusting and awful. But I don't think we have the same fears or even anger we might have with a villain like Michael Myers or Freddy Krueger.
We're mad at the mayor.
You're mad at the mayor, and you're like, oh, it's really horrifying and terrifying to have this friggin' isopod eat you, but you're like, you're just trying to live.
The isopod's not a bad guy.
He's not a bad guy. He's trying to do his job. In that Wired article from earlier, they go on to share a quote from Levinson themselves about the impact and intent from old sci-fi films who attempt to do similar things with their messages. They say they might have been more fanciful than this movie is ultimately, but I think that it's always been a form in the horror sci-fi genre that you can take existing elements of what's going on and apply it to a fictitious story. It creates a credibility that is an interesting way to work. And that's the thesis statement of the Ghouls. This film actually, like that quote and then this film actually reminded me of the book that Japan Sinks 2020 was based on. And if you remember that episode, I kind of explained that it was fictional and entertaining to some degree, but it was originally designed and intended to inform and scare people into paying attention to the dangers in this accessible and interesting way that science reports, news articles, and other boring media were not going to accomplish. Because no one was talking about the very real threat of the earthquakes and where Japan was and how very in danger it was. No one was talking about it until they read that book and were like, this is scary. Is it real? So
Yeah.
just like that, this film is trying to do that as well. And so because this film was originally intended to be a documentary, much of the information regarding the ecological disaster is based or inspired by real things happening in the Chesapeake Bay. And Kat's going to go into more detail in her section about it, but I wanted to share that 80% of the facts in this film are based in reality. And in that Wired article, Levinson went on to say, factual information in and of itself sometimes goes over our heads because it doesn't have any kind of emotional impact. There's no downside to using factual information because it smacks of feeling real, and it adds to the nature of the movie as opposed to the zombie. It's a little more terrifying because it could very really happen, because it is very really happening. So though the film takes a lot of liberties to make it more horrifying, there is a string of truth in nearly everything that's happening. So there's a very real possibility of a horrible disaster due to ecological neglect and disrespect. There isn't currently a toxic soup because of chicken runoff happening now, but the things they explain that make up the toxic soup are very real. Like the steroids that they give to the chickens. So if they did put the runoff in the water, that could very well happen. It just happens that they're not doing that right now. And then the idea that farms would dump their waste in there is not like far off. It just, luckily, it was not happening.
Yeah. And I mean, either way, like the runoff is just from rain. So, like, if they just don't properly store the waste, the rain will do the work for them, whether or not they want it to or are intentionally doing it or not.
Yeah.
If they just leave chicken poop outside and it rains, that chicken poop and the steroids inside of it will run into the bay and thus cause stuff.
Then it happens. Yeah. And I think, like, it's also, like, just the fact that we're putting all of those things into the chickens is like a whole other issue. It's a whole other problem. And
So
he, like,
chickens
says it in
grow
the
regular
video.
times.
They're like, this babe could be a big chicken in 2 days or something absolutely insane. And it's because we just want to, like, make them and kill them and go. And it's like, for what? For your chicken nuggets? You don't need chicken nuggets.
You don't,
I'm not going to go on my vegetarian kick, but I do feel that way. The other thing is that isopods are real. They're not as large as the ones get in the film, as they haven't been spiked with the toxic soup. But in the film, they do use real isopod footage at times, the little ones. And isopods do similar things that they do in the film, like eat a fish from the inside out or eat a fish's tongue. You can see images of isopods eating a fish's tongue, like being the tongue, and he looks evil in there. He's evil. He's just like, I gotcha.
I ate that tongue real good.
Really, like, I was like, no, sir.
This could be your tongue, human.
Yeah, it could be.
Don't cross me.
There is pollution that is disturbing the marine world and how it operates, and our water filtration system is broken, and for a variety of reasons. And we, like I said, we will cover fracking in a later episode. So when the film poses these answers to the horror question, we believe it. And it honestly makes it that much more terrifying than supernatural found footage films. So, and I think the facts itself are so much more terrifying than even the gore and discomfort that the infection creates, because it is like super gross. But it's more the failure of those in power and the subsequent cover-up of the belittled deaths of U.S. citizens that makes this film truly horror. And I just wanted to end my section with some quotes directly from Levinson about the crisis in Maryland and his overall intent of the film. So in that HuffPost interview, they say, there's nothing that's going on the Chesapeake Bay that can't be corrected. It's not an unknown disease. We know all of the contributing factors, so how do we aggressively try and fix it? It's 40% dead now. We don't want it to become 55 or 60% dead, because then the economics will turn against you. The chicken industry, of course, says that cleaning it up will cost jobs. But even with that, we still have time to find answers. As a filmmaker, I have the obligation to entertain an audience. But I can also pose questions. The facts are what make this movie more captivating at a certain level. And that's, again, the thesis of what Ghouls are all about. Is that you can, like, it is entertaining. It's super silly and like it's uncomfortable and horrifying, like body gore. But it's also like it really was hearing like the doctor ask the CDC, like, what do I do now? And the CDC was like, you and your staff need to leave. You need to leave the hospital and leave everyone who's in there and just go. And he was like, I'm a doctor. It is my job. Like, this is you're telling me not to do my job and to abandon all these human beings because it's hopeless. And it's something that, like, the CDC learns was reported on. Because, like, the guy is like, we found some emails. And it was like, what? Like, you found some emails and now there's, 700 plus people dead. And they were like, well, it's one little town. And I think that really is, it's not fiction. That's not made up. That's really what would happen. And so I think this film does such a phenomenal job of blending in those real facts with what is also entertaining.
Yeah. It does a really great job just showcasing how incompetent, but how like scary that is, that's like actually how it works. And the sad part is that after you read that quote, I was like, dang, but it did get to 65.
Yeah, it did. And he was like, we got time. We don't got time.
Yeah.
Like time was yesterday. And now we need to work as if we only had time yesterday.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that too when I was reading. I was like, that's not it anymore, is it? 2012 or whatever. Like, wow, hopes 10 years ago, he made this film and now look where it is. It's what he was afraid of. So hopefully people watch the film and do what I did. Because what I did was I looked up isopods. When I watched it the first time. And then I looked up like the Chesapeake Bay and pollution because I was like, how scared of this should I be?
Yeah.
So I remember you having like a similar reaction where you were like, I've got to do research, like even though it's for the show, but I feel like there's a part of us that are just like, this feels really real. Like, how real is this and how scared should I be? And so you do the research and then hopefully that scares you into conservationism. And I like when we were watching it, it made me think of Cabin Fever, which I think is one of the most like amazing uses of gore that like in a way that didn't feel like it was obviously there to make you cringe and make you upset, but it wasn't like you're exploiting humans to get there. It was like there's something in the water and now you have a flesh disease and that's what happens to you. So we're not going to talk about Cabin Fever, although it is one of my favorite horror films. Because
we'll talk about flesh diseases though. I got you. It's my entire section almost.
Yes, which is why like, yeah, watching this, I was like, oh my God, it's just like that. Except like that's more, narrative and, you're kind of seeing it all up close in a different way than if you were reporting on it in your neighborhood. But it's real scary because it's real. So Kat, why don't you tell us what it's really about?
Yeah. So as we were saying, there is a very visceral fear that I experienced while watching this movie. I already actively fear the ocean and the millions of things that live in it that we don't know about. But this really elevated that fear to a new level. So thanks, movie. I have seen things I can never unsee. There are two mistakes I made going into this film. One, eating during it. Two, keeping my eyes open during parts that I wish my eyes were closed during. This film hit a bit harder knowing that we are in the middle of a pandemic that never seems like it's going to end, and especially believable considering how mind-numbingly frustrating humanity as a whole has been through this entire experience. Like, in the movie, we get to see the CDC, and it's like, no, I get it. They're tired.
Checks out.
Yeah, no one's listened to them this entire time. They got tired a little too quick in this movie for me, just because like it happened in the span of 24 hours. You can't already be exhausted.
Yeah, they were like immediately over it.
Yeah, like, and that was rude considering that they were like the only stance of like support that this poor doctor had. But The more I learn about this film, the more horrified I am by the state of the planet, by water as a whole. The state of the literal Chesapeake Bay, which is dying actively all the time, and the level of worry I now fear from anyone who has ever mentioned to me. I just know that I've heard people say that they've gone to Maryland specifically to eat crabs. And now I'm like, that wasn't something I was going to go do, but is absolutely never something I will ever do ever after seeing this movie. Are those crabs filled with isopods that will eat you from the inside out? Probably not. And no, arguably. But they are filled with pollution and runoff and like other things I'd rather not intentionally put into my body. Also, I'll say after trying to understand the math associated with this, it is just very much clear I am not a scientist. I actively give you the warning that I'm not one, but some of this was like very hard for me to understand because of the way the numbers were, but I think I got it right. And if you're good at math and good at numbers and science, I provide all of the source material that you can look at yourself and come to your own conclusions, but they also do explain essentially what the numbers mean. So apparently the dead zone referenced in this film is very real. While it is not known for creating deadly flesh-eating isopods, it does show how unclean and unsafe the water is and does produce flesh-eating bacteria. I would love to say that since the movie released in 2012 that the dead zone got better, but unfortunately it doesn't seem to have gotten any better from what I can tell. To give some further context about what the dead zone is, the ChesapeakeBay.net has some answers in an article titled "Experts Find an Average Chesapeake Bay Dead Zone for 2021" by Rachel Felver. They offer some perspective on the current state of the bay. The dead zone is an area of little to no oxygen that forms in bay waters when excess nitrogen and phosphorus, otherwise referred to as nutrients, enter the water through polluted runoff and feed naturally occurring algae. This causes algae to bloom and grow and then eventually die off and decompose. When they decompose, the process removes oxygen from the surrounding waters faster than it can be replenished. This creates low oxygen or hypoxic conditions at the bottom of the bay. Plant and animal life are often unable to survive in this environment, which is why the area is referred to as a dead zone. The article goes on to highlight how this dead zone is impacting the Chesapeake Bay and how rapidly it's doing so. This is where it got especially for me. Since the runoff pollution is heavily based on rainfall and what pollutants exist in the Bay Area, the human factor that we can control is the level of pollutants that are nearby and how they get outside to run with rainfall into the bay. According to the U.S. Geological Survey that tested an overall average watershed pollution between October 1st, 2020 and September 30th, 2021, even though the rainfall and river flows decreased, the pollution levels were higher than normal. The survey stated that the bay was seeing flows entering around 84,880 cubic feet per second. To put that into perspective, an average size bathtub holds approximately 5.6 cubic feet of water, or 42 gallons. That's the equivalent of 15,118 bathtubs being emptied into the bay every second.
Every second.
Pollution, every second. On the same website, but on their page exclusively dedicated to the dead zone, they provide information on the annual dead zone report card that the Virginia Institute of Marine Science conducts. In the report card, they announced that the 2021 Chesapeake Bay dead zone recorded in the past 36 years. Oh, wait, I just skipped ahead. In the report card, they announced that in the 2021 Chesapeake Bay dead zone covered an average of 1.5 cubic miles during the summer, which is slightly larger than most recorded in the past 36 years. Specifically, it is 67% of the bay. This dead zone lasted 46 days longer than in 2020, with 141 days of dead zone. The duration of the 2021 dead zone was 89% longer than those recorded over the past 36 years.
Whew.
So why happen? Why is this happening? What's going on? Experts say that the reports believe several factors influence this, including more rain, hotter temperatures, and calmer winds through the late summer of 2021. Over the long-term global warming will continue to impact this dead zone, though. But there are things that you can do to decrease the size of the dead zone just by limiting the amount of pollutants we use. The states that impact the Chesapeake Bay watershed pollution are Delaware, Maryland, New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, and the District of Columbia. So the ghouls live in one of these places. The page lists ways you can help if you live in these areas that are applicable to any area, honestly, for any and all water sources around the world. Just kind of like best practices for things you could do to help the planet that impact you kind of minimally. While you may not be able to control the weather, there are actions you can take to control the amount of nutrient pollution entering the bay and to help slow the rise of climate change. Consider reducing the amount of pollution that can run off your property by installing a rain garden or rain barrel to capture and absorb rainfall, usually boiling water to kill weeds and other pests rather than chemical pesticides in your garden or yard is another option. They offer more tips. It was like a long list for helping the environment on their website, specifically the chesapeakebay.net/action/how-to tips. If you're wondering, why does this matter? My first question is, how'd you find our show? It's kind of our whole shtick that things matter. It's like our whole spiel. But that aside, there are many reasons that as a living creature on this planet, you should care what's happening to the water. And if this doesn't convince you, you might have to soon, because there's not going to be any good water left. But there are many reasons this should matter to you, whether you live near the bay or not. Human, which I assume you are if you're a human, as you can't live without drinking water for more than 3 days. With that, in fact, drinking unclean water can give you illnesses that can kill you as well. It is probably important that if you want to drink water and survive for the rest of time, that you should care about this. And honestly, this is this film does a very it's very serious, but also a little comical in how it is. An example of water and nature fighting back. This actually does happen, though. It's not just something we see in The Happening by M. Night. The trees and the water actually do fight back. It's called bacteria and science and evolution, and they work together to get stronger and more deadly for people. So specifically, the way in which the water can fight back is Vibrio Valnificas. And what is that? It's flesh-eating bacteria that enters into open wounds, cuts, and abrasions, as well as through food. So you drink the water, you can get this. You eat food things that were in the water are now out of the water and you're consuming them. You can get it from that. You can literally enter the water for recreational purposes and have cuts on your hands. As someone who owns cats, I actively at all moments have cuts on my hands. So if I went into the water, I could get this thing. And it's specifically flesh-eating bacteria that lives and naturally occurs in the bay, but is being essentially exacerbated from global warming and the rise in temperatures. So Vibrio or waterborne illnesses can be transmitted through consumption of contaminated shellfish and seafood as well. According to the National Center of Coastal Ocean Science, NOAA for short, as recently as June 21, they predicted the occurrence of the pathogenic Vibrio Valnificas bacteria in the Chesapeake Bay. So flesh-eating bacteria in the Chesapeake Bay as recently as 2021, and is apparently a yearly occurrence. So we'll see that again this upcoming summer. Apparently this is somewhat natural. It's something that happens during the warmer months, specifically when water becomes warmer. Logic would indicate that the increasing global temperature for long periods of time caused by global warming would in fact increase the frequency of Vibrio Valnificas, or instead of saying the word, I'm going to say flesh-eating bacteria just because it's easier. The Chesapeake Bay program at chesapeakebay.net again provides some useful information on this subject in their page titled 5 Facts About Vibrio, they confirm what my theory was, that global warming will increase the occurrence of Vibrio illnesses in skin infections. While flesh-eating bacteria occurs naturally in the Chesapeake Bay, the increase in recent years is a direct result of climate change and pollution. As the bay temperatures rise and nutrient pollution from urban stormwater, agricultural runoff, sewage, and animal waste continues to increase, algal blooms, or like algae, become more frequent. The sea levels continue to rise. Coastal bodies of brackish and saltwater are beginning to spill into freshwater streams across the country. Because Vibrio thrives in areas of high salinity, their habitat is likely to grow in size in years to come, causing people who live further inland to also be at risk for infection. So where I said before, like, hey, if you don't care about it now, because you don't live near the water, you're gonna have to soon, because the hotter the planet gets, the more likely that this specific kind of bacteria will spread inland. The article provides some advice to avoid infection that isn't even like taking better care of the planet. It's literally like, this is the stuff you can do right now to protect yourself from these things. So it basically outlines that the following things you can do to avoid infection are, after it rains, wait 48 hours after rainfall before going into a body of water. Specifically, it's referencing the bay, but anywhere that has salt water in the vicinity of it, I think that's a good rule to follow to avoid that bacteria. Because within that 48 hours past rainfall, the pollutants have been flushed into the water and are just kind of sitting there waiting for you to infect yourself. After that, you can also avoid this through making sure your body is free of cuts, wearing gloves if you choose to enter the water with cuts, or a waterproof bandage, as well as if you're going to interact with uncooked or undercooked shellfish, that you wear gloves for that as well. It also recommends keeping hand sanitizer and antibiotic ointment on hand to treat wounds immediately after you get them, to avoid infection. And this would also help in the instance of if you had gone into the water to kill infection at the source. Ultimately, moral of the story is we need to treat our planet better, guys, and take steps to dismantle the systems that negatively impact the planet. I think a clear indicator of why we have been in this situation more recently is, if you remember our last presidency, there was a lot of deregulation for companies to dump things into the water, into like deregulation of environmental protections. So it makes sense that things would get worse kind of rapidly. But there are things that you can do that are both big and small to help take care of the planet. And I have a little list for you. You can go as small as changing the products that you use to be more natural, not using pesticides, instead using boiling water, as the article said earlier, as well as, plant trees, garden, locally source your food, clean your neighborhood, collecting rainwater to reduce the amount of rain water that gets run off and empties into our water supply, as well as, just kind of like making sure you're not dumping things into the planet. Ultimately, if you want to do more, there's legislation that you can help. I don't have like specifics, but you can keep an eye on your local legislation to make sure that the places around you are not falling victim to these things. So if they're trying to build a pipeline, for example, if they're trying to pollute, like deregulate the requirements for companies who have to literally safely remove waste, if you are actively aware of what's happening around you, you can better protect you and those around you. The government has proven time and time again to be extremely incompetent. We see this in the film, showing that the mayor that literally knew all of this stuff ahead of time and just didn't respond to the emails because it just wasn't important. So I think the biggest takeaway from that, and also in witnessing how this past year or so has gone, is recognizing that we are kind of alone in this. The government's not going to do it for us, so we have to take responsibility. So just being aware, as aware as possible as you can, to make sure that you're taking care of the planet and each other, is one of the biggest things you can do. And that's kind of my biggest advice. But I'll provide resources in our description, John, and in our blog, specifically kind of help you navigate living a more eco-friendly life, I spent about like 30 minutes to like 3 hours investigating eco-friendly home stuff. So I have lots of resources available for you that may or may not be vetted. I don't know. We'll find out.
New obsessions.
Yeah, I was just like, how live planet but not hurt it?
Yeah.
How do? And the internet had answers. So there's just easy ones like don't use chemicals to do things, like use different kinds of products to clean your clothes.
Yeah.
Like little tiny changes. Things. Yeah, exactly. But the biggest ones seem to be like collecting rainwater, like storing rainwater, which is good in the first place because if we have a water shortage, rainwater is clean enough most of the time for you to consume and is good for gardening as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah. My friend Deb, who has a beautiful large garden, collects rainwater, and then it goes through like her sprinkler system to water all her plants, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
And she's also got solar panels and all kinds of cool things, and I'm like, this is the house that I want in my life. It's as eco-friendly as possible. And it's like there are little things that we can do, and then sadly there's a lot of things that larger companies could be doing, and it's really them. And we will talk about fracking, which I think is super important, especially since we do reside in Pennsylvania. But I think it's also interesting because this is Maryland, and that's like right there. My friend got married in Maryland, like, like just very recently. So, yeah, it's right there. We are contributing in some way just by not having made those changes.
Yeah, and I mean, also, fun fact, there are isopods. They do exist. They can replace a fish's tongue, and they're big and they're in the ocean. But they are likely not going to eat humans anytime soon, or ever potentially. Like they really didn't seem interested when I really expected, like in doing my research, I was like, I'm gonna find something horrible that I never want to know. I don't want to know. I did, but like not the thing I expected. I expected murderous isopods, and that's not what I found, which was refreshing. I was like, oh, thank God.
Yeah, I mean, isopods are also really creepy. They have too many legs, and they're like, they look evil. Like their faces look like they're up to no good.
Yeah,
and they're just bugs. And they're not evil. Like they're just existing. But at the same time, you're like, I don't.
They're scary looking. You're not wrong. They are. It's definitely, but they're not going to eat your tongue for real. At least very unlikely. So, which is good. Congratulations, world. You got one. Yeah, and I will say, like, okay, the isopods are really scary, but I think even if they didn't use isopods, if they just use like regular flesh-eating bacteria that actually exists, like that would have been super scary too. Like I remember reading the one thing from the Baltimore Sun, and the lady was like, it kind of takes away, like, I think I see what they were trying to do, but did this actually like ignite a fire to like change stuff? And I was like, I see that, because like your first thing was isopods. I was also like, I don't want to research because I don't want to find out isopods are real. I don't want to know. But like, it was very easy to find out all the horrible things that are actually happening there, specifically around like, I am never going in water. I already didn't want to, but like it's just a natural occurrence, flesh-eating bacteria. You go to the beach, now your skin's gone and you die. Like,
yeah,
it's very upsetting to me. And it's very real. It is just getting worse and worse as time goes on. So I'm just like, yeah, the fire has been lit for me. I was already very worried about the other bad things that were going to happen to the planet and the world. And now I'm like, oh, but also the planet though, really, that's urgency.
Yeah.
Urgency.
Yeah. Super real.
I'm trying to think. There was also like a TikToker that I follow, and I can't remember their name right now, but it was just like a frustration with like essentially like Americans being like, oh, I don't know, it's so hopeless. I don't know what we can do. And it's like, you don't get to say that. You're the ones who came here and did this. You don't get to just be like, apocalypse. It's like, no, but you need to do things to help the planet because the planet's still here and it's your fault. So like, get it together and do this stuff. Like, it's not a haha joke time.
Yeah.
The apocalypse, it's happening. So don't just laugh, ha ha, sad now. You need to actually like locally source your food, reduce your waste products, boil water instead of spending money on pesticides. These are all like super simple things that you can do.
Yeah. It's also a matter of like having those things become more accessible too, right? Like locally sourcing your food. Not everyone has that ability or has local produce or
there's food deserts and stuff
co-ops.
too. Yeah.
So it's also
all
like
very intentional.
kind of petitioning for the acting powers to make those things accessible so that we can contribute to like the world getting better, because some of us just kind of have to keep living. But for those of you who can, like every little thing does help. Even like you're not going to make the same impact as if a company stops doing those things, but you're doing something. Like even just doing like meatless Mondays, right? Like that's already drastically changing if everyone did something like that, or reducing like the waste, or in recycling, trying not to buy things that have lots of packaging. Like we do that, and I think it's super annoying when I'm like, I know I want that thing, I want the single package applesauce, but no, I'm gonna have to get a jar of applesauce so that I'm not using so much waste from every single package of this little applesauce. But I'm like, it's tedious to have to scoop it out every time, and I hate it. But it's like you kind of just have to like do your little part, and it might make you feel better, and it might make the world a little better for the like when we leave it. It's still gonna be here, and it's gonna look different, and it's gonna take a long time for it to be uninhabitable, but we're in a time where we're kind of at the end of our chance to make it
go the other way. Yeah.
Like we're running out of time to change that fate.
And just the fact that there are little things you can do. Like the one that really stood out to me is like, I know for a fact there are people who just like go buy pesticides and stuff, where boiling water is just free. If you have electricity and gas, you can, or even if not, like you can make fire, make boiling water, go out on a summer day and leave a pot on the hot asphalt, let boil now. And you can get rid of weeds and stuff that way. You know what I mean? Like there's like, that one really stood out to me and was like, I could do that now without changing anything else. Could do that now. Not that I'm spraying. I don't have money for pesticides, but like still, if I have weeds that I wish to remove, that's something I could do instead. And then also just like, there's just like awareness that needs to take place. The rainwater thing was something like I already planned to do eventually, but I was like, I could start doing that now just so, like as a preventative measure, even if I'm not going to use it for anything specific.
I want to start doing like composting and like those things, so you're not wasteful with like, your food, because it's like I recycle a lot of packaging, but I don't. But even then, that's a whole video on itself. Is the fraud that is recycling, because things just have the recycling logo on it and then some random number, and it actually doesn't matter. Like if it's like only 1 and 2. If you see 1 and 2 on your recycling things, those are the only things that are recyclable. If it has a 5, that's a lie. You're not doing anything. It's bad.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other field of things to like discuss on how we do it. But I think it's also, as people, we need to realize that we're not in these little isolated pods. We're not in our own isopods of existence. The things we do have a bigger impact on the rest of the world and ultimately the other people around us. And so instead of being like the horrible, crabby governing people that were in this film who were like, whatever, a tiny town, care about your neighbors and try to do what you can.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately the world, it sucks. But having existential dread doesn't actually do anything productive except for make you sad. So, and it just, it doesn't change anything. So ultimately just do what you can, do the best you can. And if you did bad today, do better tomorrow. Yeah. It's all you can do.
Just keep trying to one up yourself.
The biggest thing is you got to do something though.
Yeah.
Because just being like, that's not going to do anything. The planet will continue to die. We're not procreating anyway, but like extra. No one will be able to, like, because the water is gone. Poison in our bodies intentionally through neglect is not good time. So there are, and I mean, we'll put some like things you can do. I mean, it seems like a really big thing. Like you can't stop companies yourself. But if you're doing these things, it's gonna do something positive. Enough people do it.
Yeah. And just speak up. And I think when we get to like our fracking and other episodes, we'll really explore what's happening, even in your own backyard, and how big companies are manipulating the facts and information so that you don't know or don't care.
Yeah. And I mean, you control yourself. That's all you can do. So control yourself.
Yeah.
Don't do the same.
Do something.
Do something.
Do something. So that was our episode on the Bay and talking about pollution and the crisis there in our water systems. And do your part. Check out our ways to help section and join us next week when we're talking about another eco horror film. And don't get
Yay. They'll eat your kids, or the isopods will, or the flesh-eating bacteria, because you go to the Jersey Shore and then you die. Okay?
I will never set foot on a Jersey beach. You
go to the Jersey Shore, it's in the Bay. It's the Bay area. I'm never eating Bay scallops again. I don't even know if it's from the same place,
not going
but
to
no.
A beach in the Upper East Coast anyway.
Yeah, it's not safe. It's not, fish die. They can't live there. Why would you think children should go play there now? Just because for funsies? No.
The only time my snobby peninsula self will prevail is that I refuse.
Yeah, it's like so like inland is just so like all the areas there, you don't want to go there. But it's also like that's all that's gonna be here later.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Florida's gonna be gone. New Orleans, gone. Sorry. All right, well.
We're gonna do stuff though. We're gonna do it. We're gonna do it. We're gonna keep going. We're gonna do it. Because we have to. We're here.
Yeah.
That's your evening news, so
That is.
hello. Goodbye.